Thank you so much. It's really, really exciting to be at the first OpenCon satellite event that's hosted by a scholarly society, and thank you for the wonderful introduction. OpenCon's a little bit different than a lot of other conferences. One of the things that sets it apart is it's not only a sort of in-person global conference that happens once a year, but it's also a year-round community. And one of the sort of special aspects of the in-person OpenCon that this year will be in Berlin is that, somewhat ironically, I know, attendance at OpenCon's by application only. And the reason for that is because we want sort of the most engaged, energetic, effective sort of students, early career researchers, early career librarians to be in the room, not just those that could afford to attend. So we actually end up awarding a majority of participants with some kind of travel scholarship to make sure we can have as sort of diverse and inclusive a group as possible, and participation's driven by sort of merit and potential rather than just ability to pay to go to wherever the meeting's being hosted. So I want to start off by just giving you a little bit more context. This is I think definitely one of the most exciting satellite events to happen this year, but also far from the only one. So this map indicates with those little dots all of the locations where OpenCon satellite events have been held since we had the first OpenCon in 2014. So you can see we've actually had more than 50 satellite events in those first 3 years in dozens of countries around the world. So it really is a global enterprise. And as was alluded to in the introduction, we've had a tremendous response in terms of the applicants to participate in the global OpenCon event and set a new record this past year with more than 13,000 applications from 176 countries to participate in the Berlin event, and all of the countries highlighted in orange here, countries where we've received applications from. So with all these satellite events, this one is a particularly important first for the global OpenCon community. As has already been alluded to by Brian and others, scholarly societies have a hugely important role to play in setting the default to open and seeing ECS host this event and really sort of make that commitment to not only driving change within ECS's own policies and how ECS handles the sort of business models behind publication, but also to drive culture change within all of the researchers that are part of ECS. Something that is incredibly heartening for us and something that we hope will be modeled by other scholarly societies as well. So in the talk today, the organizers asked me to sort of provide an overview of the open access side of things. Some angles of this have already been covered by previous presenters, but I'll go into a little bit more detail, which I hope will be helpful for you all in sort of understanding the need for open access, the benefits of open when it comes to research articles, and how you might choose to get involved. So to start, I want to talk just a little bit about the problem. Got to have at least one GIF in a presentation to make sure everybody's awake. So the experience of coming across a paper that is definitely probably useful for your research, but you just can't get access to, is about as universal experience as I have found among researchers. And it's an incredibly frustrating one, even at well-resourced institutions. This happens, and if you're if you're not at a R1 institution, if you don't belong to an institution whose library has literally millions of dollars to spend on subscriptions, then this is going to be a very, very common experience. And the reason for that, again, as has already been alluded to, but I'll provide a little bit more data, is that academic journal subscriptions have become incredibly expensive, and libraries have had to pay more and more each year to even just try to keep up with the increases in price. So this is data from the Association of Research Libraries showing how much ARL members, so essentially large research libraries, are spending on journal subscriptions. So this is showing that research libraries are spending about 400% more in 2011 when this graph was created than they were in 1986, the first year for this, which is a huge increase, multiple times more than inflation over this period. Like I said, this is from 2011. ARL has recently released up-to-date data from 2014-2015 academic year, but not a pretty graph like this. But I've included the most recent data point. I'm afraid it's quite depressing. Right now in 2014-2015, that spend is up to over 500% more. And Sort of what this looks like on the individual journal level is incredibly expensive average journal subscription prices. There are actually more than 15 entire academic disciplines where the average subscription for 1 year for one institution is more than $1,000. And many of the disciplines are much more expensive to that, and disciplines that are, certainly of interest to the ECS community, like chemistry, the most expensive discipline, with an average yearly subscription of $4,773. And again, these are averages, right? These aren't the most expensive journals by any means in these disciplines. And so you can see when journals are this expensive, even well-resourced institutions have to make tough trade-offs. Even Harvard has come out and said that they don't have enough money in their library to continue to keep up with price increases with journals. And again, as has already been alluded to by some of my colleagues, a large reason for this increase in prices over the last few decades is that academic journal publishing is very much a big business. So this graph essentially compares the profit margins of two of the larger academic publishers, Springer, where the last data we have available is from 2012 before they were acquired by a venture capital fund, and then Elsevier on the right. So this is, all the data here is from 2014 unless otherwise noted, but you can see that academic journal publishers, the largest ones, the largest commercial entities, are some of the most profitable companies in the world, with Elsevier having over a 37% profit margin in 2014. And this has remained pretty constant year in and year out for decades. And again, Elsevier in the most recent year cleared more than $1 billion in just profit alone. And it's gotten so bad that even outlets like The Economist are starting to take notice, where they've called academic publishing, quote, a license to print money. And that's really what it's become, unfortunately. And I think it's important to recognize, as ECS very clearly has, that the system that we entrust to disseminate all of the findings that we work so hard to create is fundamentally out of line with the values of the academy, with the values of researchers. And that's really, really important. There's a great quote from one of the past presidents of the Electrochemical Society talking about how important the researchers, or how important the research that you're doing is. And when it's locked behind a paywall, right, that is limiting the audience that has access to it, that can build on it. And with the real world issues that ECS research focuses on, the importance of it getting into the hands of other researchers that can put it to use to industry is crucial. And so, luckily, it's not all depressing things, I promise. There is, as again has already been alluded to, a system called open access for distributing the results of research in a way that is in alignment with the values of the academy and ECS. So as Ashley has already mentioned, open access, as defined by the Budapest Open Access Initiative, which was sort of the meeting that really defined this term for the first time, is free, immediate online access to scientific and scholarly articles with full reuse rights. And I take the time to sort of talk about the definition again, because I think the second part of this definition, the full reuse rights, is really, really critical. It's not just that you can get access to sort of read an article, but that you have the right to bulk download the entire research literature, do things like text and data mining analyses on the research literature. That's not just flat PDFs that are difficult to do that kind of analysis with, or to translate into other languages, or to download onto hard drives and take into remote regions where internet access might not be stable. So there are sort of two paths to achieving an open access future. One is to start publishing in open access journals that make all of the articles that they publish immediately openly available online under an open license, like the Creative Commons attribution license that the Gates Foundation requires, as Ashley mentioned. And then the second path is what's called self-archiving. And so this is important because through the self-archiving route, even if you sort of need to publish in a subscription-based journal because that's what your advisor wants you to publish in, or that's where you feel like that's the only place you're going to get appropriate credit, and you sort of have to work within the system, a lot of journals will allow you to make a copy of the text of your article publicly accessible in some form online. So just digging into these two paths a little bit more, there are more than 9,000 open access journals that are being published today. And there's a great index at the directory of open access journals, doaj.org, where you can find open access journals that might be a good fit for your work. And I'm sure you're probably already familiar with a number of open access journals. And one development related to OA journals that I think has been really heartening and speaks to the power that researchers can have in setting the default to open if you choose to exercise it, is a journal called Lingua that was published by Elsevier until, well, I guess it's still being published, but what happened is a couple years ago in 2015, the entire editorial board of Lingua resigned en masse after failed negotiations with Elsevier to open up the journal with reasonable APCs. So the entire editorial board left and started a new journal called Classa that essentially took, sort of the place of Lingua in the community. And sort of, the editorial board moved over there, and it really sort of took that position, even though Lingua continues as what some have called a zombie journal, since its editorial board has left it. But I think this really shows how much power researchers have. You can make these decisions and move, and make sure that the publication venues you're not only publishing in, but also serving on the editorial boards for or working with are open and aligned with your values. For the self-archiving route, there are more than 2,000 repositories now out there at institutions, discipline-specific repositories, as have already been mentioned, ones like PubMed Central or the Archive. So in many cases, there's probably a repository that would be a good fit for your work, and about 72% of publishers allow for authors to make some form of your article publicly accessible through a repository. And so there's quite a bit of upside to doing this. Again, has been already talked about a little bit, but I'll provide a little bit more data. There have been dozens of studies now that have looked at the increase in rate of citations for articles that are made openly accessible. And what this graph is showing, each one of those little dots is a study that looked at what's called open access citation advantage across different disciplines. So you can see really, really significant advantages across most of these disciplines, with articles that are open receiving up to 3 times the number of citations in some disciplines like agricultural studies, physics, medicine, but even sort of on the lower end here, still receiving a significant bump. And those are all citations that I think you as an author would really want to have. But it's not just citations that sort of authors benefit from when making their work openly available. There's all types of sort of other benefits. This is a slide I borrowed from Ethan White, who's a researcher that's had a long-standing commitment to making his work openly available. And this is sort of a graph, or I guess a chart, showing all of the different ways that he's found that being open, both in terms of the articles that he's published as well as his workflows, as Brian was alluding to, have helped him. So it's helped their lab to be more efficient. It's raised the visibility so that he's more well-known in the community, and that's actually led him to find more collaborators, which has led to more research. And also, it's led, in his particular case, to more funding as well. So there are a whole host of benefits to being open, in addition to that open access citation advantage. So I want to talk a little bit about how we are moving towards open by default and the role that funders are playing in that. There are now more than 140 research funders in over 24 countries that require articles reporting on research they fund to be made publicly accessible or freely accessible online. And in the US, the most sort of high visibility example of that was a 2013 directive issued by Barack Obama's White House, essentially expanding a 2008 NIH policy requiring that all of the research that they fund be made publicly accessible. So this directive expanded that NIH policy essentially to the rest of the federal government, with some important differences, but that's sort of the gist of that directive. And now federal agencies that fund science and research are implementing those policies. And I think it's important to note how much sort of government has made this a priority. And actually, when sort of the last year of President Obama's presidency, they released a number of impact reports across different sectors, one of which was the Obama administration's leadership on science, technology, and innovation. And I think it's very telling that that White House directive requiring that federally funded research be made publicly accessible clocked in at number 13 of their top 100 sort of examples of impact. So, sort of speaks to the priority with which government is placing on opening up research and education. And another sort of really interesting example that happened last year was we actually saw the Vice President of the United States openly talking about at conferences of researchers about the importance of open access to not only research articles but also open data as well, and has made that sort of a core tenet of the Cancer Moonshot initiative that Vice President Biden launched during the end of the Obama era. But it's not just public funders. Again, as Ashley's already mentioned, the Gates Foundation's released the world's strongest open access policy that sort of came into full force on January 1st of this year, but they're far from alone. There's actually a group that's being convened called the Open Research Funders Group that actually has a meeting here in DC tomorrow that is, comprises funders like the Gates Foundation, of course, but many others like the Lauren John Arnold Foundation, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the Sloan Foundation, and others. So private foundations are starting to bake these open policies into their work as well. So in the few minutes I have remaining, I just want to talk about how sort of individual researchers, and particularly early career researchers, have had a significant impact in sort of freeing the science and sort of setting the default to open. So I have three short stories to share. The first is Dr. Ahmed Ogunlaja, who is from Nigeria. When I met Ahmed in 2013, he was a medical student leader at a local medical university in Nigeria. And he came to the sort of precursor to the first OpenCon event, and that's sort of really where he sort of learned about what open was about and sort of got energized and went back to Nigeria and started an organization called Open Access Nigeria that established chapters across many of the universities in that country. And essentially recruited early career medical students and young researchers to sort of run trainings about open access, open data, and now open education at universities across the country. And they now estimate they've reached tens of thousands of early career researchers and more established faculty to teach them about open research practices and sort of more move the needle towards open, raise awareness, and make sure the research that's done in Nigeria gets sort of the visibility that it deserves. And actually this Open Access Nigeria organization has served as an inspiration for other similar organizations that have been founded in Nepal, in Sudan, in South Africa, in India, even in Canada, and elsewhere. And, as I said, Ahmed was just a medical student. Local leader when I first met him. And last year he was recognized by the Obama administration with a Mandela Fellowship for young African leaders. And earlier this September, he was a keynote at the first Open Science Fair alongside some leading figures from the research community. The second person I will mention is Chris. He's a PhD student at the University of Tilburg in the Netherlands. And his research focuses on sort of detecting fraud in social science research. And one of the ways he does it is by sort of doing bulk text and data mining analysis on the research literature. He sort of got written up in Vox earlier, I guess last year, for a bot that he sort of co-created called StatCheck that essentially analyzes the full text of social science papers looking for statistical errors in the papers and found that actually quite a few of them had errors, and that I think the majority of those errors actually were sort of in favor of sort of tipping the results towards statistical significance. So essentially, for example, like leaving out one of the zeros in your p-value, which is a pretty big problem. And the reason I mention him is his research sort of fundamentally relies on doing text and data mining analysis on the full text of research articles. And this is an example of why we need full open access, right? This work only is possible when you have that full text in HTML and can actually perform this analysis. And that was sort of just what he focused on for his research, but in 2015, he participated in our OpenCon meeting in Brussels, and following that, he became really active around advocacy. So he started sort of sharing his story about his research and why reuse rights and text and data mining rights were so essential to allowing that to happen, and has enlisted sort of members of the European Parliament as allies in raising the importance of why text and data mining rights are so important, and is working with Julia Rita, who is sort of leading the copyright reform movement within Europe to hopefully include more robust protection for text and data mining exceptions in that copyright reform. But all of this is sort of happening because he sort of started sharing his story and started engaging as a researcher in the political process, advocating for openness. Then the final sort of story of how an early career researcher's had a significant impact is Corina Logan, who is one of our OpenCon satellite event organizers from Cambridge. And she sort of through working on the OpenCon satellite event and getting connected with other individual researchers at Cambridge that were interested in open, started a campaign called Bullied into Bad Science, which was already referenced by Ashley earlier. But it's a really interesting campaign that's started to get some serious attention, like from the Times in the UK, essentially looking at how a lot of the research practices, like judging individuals by impact factor, you're really fundamentally out of alignment with what research should be about. And so she, with some colleagues, has started a campaign called Bullied into Bad Science to change that, to sort of teach individual researchers, early career researchers, how to be advocates for changing these practices. So in terms of how you can get involved, I hope these stories will sort of show you how even early career researchers that are just sort of learning about open research for the first time can have a really significant impact. So I'd say, honestly, one of the most important things you can do is just to start having conversations around open when you get back to your home institutions. If we're going to sort of set the default to open, that's going to require millions of individual conversations in labs, in departments across the country and across the world. So just starting those conversations on campus is a great way to get involved. You're also welcome to host OpenCon satellite events like this one on campus to sort of bring together sort of a critical mass of people at your institution that are interested in open. And then finally, how many of you are also members of other scholarly societies? So you're very lucky to have ECS, which is so progressive on these policies. That's not always the case with other scholarly societies. So I think one of the important things you can do as well is to sort of take the strategies that ECS is developing, the conversations that are happening here, to those other scholarly societies that you're a part of, to the other meetings, to start this conversation, to find the other individuals that are active there, that are interested in open, and start to sort of nudge those other societies, to sort of adopt policies like what ECS is pioneering. So thank you so much for inviting me to give this talk. And again, we're really, really excited about this first OpenCon satellite event hosted by a scholarly society.